Have you ever crept into a dark room to check on a sleeping baby, and in the dim light caught them wide awake, eyes wide open, staring at a corner of the room with such absolute stillness and such complete absorbed intensity that for one irrational, goosebump-raising second, you found yourself slowly turning your own head to look at what they were looking at, and found, of course, nothing there, just the empty dark, just the ordinary shadow of a room at night. And yet the baby kept staring, unblinking and unmoving, with the particular quality of attention that, on a human face, usually means something is very much there. That moment, the baby alone in the dark, staring at nothing, so still they seem almost not to be breathing, with an expression of absolute focused attention directed at the absolute absence of anything visible, is one of the most reliably unsettling things a parent can witness. And it has spawned more ghost stories, more folklore, more cultural mythology about the supernatural perception of infants than perhaps any other single baby behavior in the history of human parenting. Because something about it feels like it cannot be nothing, feels like it means something, feels like the baby is seeing something that the adult world has learned to stop seeing. And the scientific explanation for what is actually happening, while it contains no ghosts, is in certain ways more astonishing than the ghost story, because it reveals something about the infant visual system and the developing brain that fundamentally changes how you understand what a newborn is actually experiencing every single moment of their waking life. The starting point of this story is a fact about the newborn visual system that most people know in outline, but rarely stop to fully reckon with. At birth, and for the first several weeks of life, a baby's visual acuity is extremely limited, roughly 20 times poorer than normal adult vision, and in practical terms, this means that the sharp, detailed, richly textured visual world that adults inhabit is simply not available to a newborn. What they see is blurry, low contrast, limited in color, and clear only within a very narrow range of roughly 8 to 12 inches, beyond which the world dissolves into a fog of light and shape and movement without definition. But here is the piece that is almost never mentioned alongside this well-known fact. While the newborn's ability to resolve fine detail is severely limited, their sensitivity to high contrast, to the specific quality of a sharp boundary between dark and light, is actually heightened relative to their other visual capacities, not diminished, because the visual cells most sensitive to contrast and edge detection are among the first to become functional in the developing visual system. And this means that a newborn who cannot clearly see a face from across the room can see, with startling clarity and precision, the exact place where light ends and darkness begins. And a room at night, even a very dark room, is almost never uniformly dark. It contains edges everywhere, boundaries between the slightly lighter gray of a wall and the deeper black of a corner, between the ambient light of a window and the shadow of a curtain, between the pale ceiling and the dark edge where it meets the wall, and to a visual system tuned specifically to detect exactly these high contrast boundaries. A dark room is not featureless. It is full of precisely the kind of visual information that the newborn brain is most equipped and most motivated to process, which is why a baby in a dark room is often not resting their eyes from overstimulation, but actively engaging with the most visually interesting thing in their current environment, which is the high contrast edge in the corner of the room that no adult has noticed, because adult visual systems stopped giving special priority to edges decades ago. Now here is the first twist that changes the picture significantly. The baby staring into the dark corner is not just responding to the contrast of the edge it can detect, it is responding to something much more specific and much more revealing about how the newborn brain is organized. Because the newborn visual system has a pronounced preference, a deeply wired attentional bias, toward edges that are curved and arranged in a particular spatial configuration, and that configuration is the rough geometry of a face, the oval outline, the darker interior, the specific distribution of light and shadow that all faces share and that no other common object reliably produces in quite the same way. We established in an earlier script that babies are born with an innate face detection system that scans the environment for face-like patterns, and this system does not require good visual acuity to operate. It requires only the kind of coarse, high-contrast, edge-based information that the newborn visual system is already capable of processing from the first days of life, which means that when a baby is staring at a dark corner with apparent fascination, what is very often happening is that the face detection system has found something in the arrangement of shadows and edges that partially satisfies its search parameters, that resembles, in the coarse and high contrast terms that the newborn visual system operates in, something face-like, something that triggers the same basic orienting and attending response that a real face would trigger. And the baby is doing what they were built to do, which is to direct their full attentional resources toward anything that might be a face, anything that carries the signature of another living being, anything in the environment that might be the most important thing in the environment, which, in the ancestral world that shaped this response, a face always was. Here is the second twist, and this one takes the story somewhere that is simultaneously the most scientifically grounded and the most philosophically interesting place it can go. Researchers studying infant visual processing have found evidence that some of what babies experience during the dark staring episodes that parents find so eerie may not originate in the external environment at all, but may be internally generated. Maybe, in the most technical sense, visual noise produced by the immature visual system itself, spontaneous patterns of neural activity in the retina and the visual cortex that produce something. The baby's brain registers as visual experience even in the absence of any real visual input. The immature retina, still developing its full complement of photoreceptors and still calibrating its signal processing pathways, generates a higher level of spontaneous electrical activity than the mature retina. It is, in the language of signal processing, noisier, more prone to producing signals that do not correspond to external stimuli, and this retinal noise travels up the visual pathway the same way that real visual input does, reaching the visual cortex and being processed there as if it were information about the world, which means that a baby staring into what appears to us as empty darkness may be experiencing a visual field that is, from the inside, not empty at all, that contains patterns and movements and possibly even shape-like configurations generated by the internal activity of a visual system that is still in the process of learning to be a visual system, still calibrating the difference between signal and noise, still figuring out where the self ends and the world begins. We cannot know what this internal visual experience looks like from the inside. We cannot enter it. We have no language that reaches it. But we can say, with the confidence that the neuroscience of developing visual systems provides, that the absolute darkness that the adult in the doorway perceives when they look at the corner the baby is staring at is very probably not the darkness that the baby is experiencing, that the baby's visual world in those dark and private moments is richer and stranger and more populated with internally generated experience than the empty room would suggest, which is perhaps the most accurate and the most haunting explanation of all for why a baby staring into the dark looks, with such uncanny conviction, like a person watching something that is not there. Because in the only sense that matters for experience, in the only sense the baby has access to, something is there, something is happening, and the baby is attending to it with the full, serious, undivided attention that it deserves. What does all of this mean, taken together, for the parent who catches their baby in the dark with those wide, fixed, deeply serious eyes directed at the empty corner? It means that the most honest answer to the question of what the baby is seeing is not nothing. It is something. It is always something. Whether that something is the high contrast edge that the face detection system is investigating, or the internally generated visual noise of an immature retina still learning to distinguish its own activity from the signals of the world, or some combination of both that produces an experience we have no adult analog for, and therefore no reliable way to imagine. It means that the baby is not absent in those moments. They are not blank or switched off or lost in the simple emptiness of a developing mind that has not yet accumulated enough to occupy itself. They are present, fully present, engaged with a visual experience that is real to them even if it is invisible to us, doing the continuous and effortful and genuinely extraordinary work of being a new nervous system trying to understand the world it has been born into, using whatever information is available to it, whether that information comes from the outside world or from the internal weather of its own developing circuits. And the next time you stand in the doorway of a dark room and watch a baby stare at nothing with that particular quality of absorbed, unwavering, slightly otherworldly attention, you can let the mystery stay. You can resist the urge to explain it all the way down to comfortable certainty, because the honest scientific answer leaves room for wonder, leaves a space of genuine not knowing about the inner experience of a new mind in its first encounter with the world. And that space of not knowing, that edge between what we can measure and what we cannot enter, is perhaps the most appropriate place to stand when you are in the presence of a consciousness that is just